joined the club not because he was speaking nicely about me, but to applaud the fact that both Johnson and Kwan Singh, according to me, represent a different kind of visionaries. I have been brought up in times when certain things, certain ideas were taken as sacred, sanctified, almost like the revealed words in scriptures. Times have changed. We are living in a different kind of world because where some of the problems we face today cannot be captured within the framework that has dominated the world today. To give you an instance, this is not in the paper. It is by way of an introduction. But I want to go back to that quickly. I just want to give one instance. If you look at the data on genocides in 20th century, which killed nearly 230 million people at a rough guess within 1 century. In this century, which we have just passed, you will find that many of the causes that we shout horse on had played a very little role in it. Out of 335 million, less than 10 million died in religious conflict. But if you look at the data carefully, you will find that 2/3 of this 230 odd million killed died in the hands of their own states. And 2/3 of them died, if you look at it from another point of view, in the hands of secular states. Nationalism has killed many more people than the terrorists have killed. But we have no equipment to handle that because we think nationalism is a necessary stage to one world, future world. Everybody has to go through that stage. We think a secular statecraft is the ultimate guarantee against oppression on grounds of faith. So there are these parts of the story too. And here today I take up issue, take up an area which we are known to all of us, but we have forgotten its implications. Let me put it that way. What I say, it has been said many times, not only here but everywhere, that I am a very controversial writer or researcher, whatever you want to call me. The fact of the matter is this, that what I write and affirm is known to everybody. But that is not something one should say in public. Because people suspect in the heart of hearts that what I am saying, they also want to say that. And there's temptation they have been fighting. Therefore they find me controversial. Everybody knows what I say. Everybody knows the data on genocide. Everybody knows that enormous numbers have been killed in the name of ideologies, many more in the name of ideologies, from nationalism to Nazism to Leninist Marxism. But nobody has liked to say that, because that's not the fashionable thing to say. And so, anyway, so I now start with it. So here also you will find what I am saying is known. All right, let me start with an example here also. Everybody knows that they learn their first language, the mother tongue, not by learning the grammar, not by learning the spellings, or not by using cryptograms. They learn it only on the basis of memory and inner equipment, without any given tools of education or any pedagogic intervention. Mother tongue, you learn it from your mother. This post, you learn it through an intimate relationship. And you know that no other language you will learn ever in your life again in the same way. Because you will be taught other languages. But you don't have to be taught your mother tongue. You pick it up just like that. And that's the work of Nandy. But nevertheless, we live in a world where civilization begins with writing, with literacy. And therefore, anything which is learned but doesn't look like being learned, which doesn't have textbooks, doesn't have notations in music, don't look like learning. This is what I am concentrating on today. I do so because there are cultures, particularly small cultures, small traditions, marginal cultures, marginalized traditions, which have no place for writing and literacy. Recently there was a controversy about one of the most famous playback singers in Indian film history. That singer died nearly 30 years ago. It was somebody accused another person of stealing from him, plagiarism. So the family had to come out and say that actually he was illiterate. Here was a person whose songs were being sung all over half the world, looked a very sophisticated man, sang very sophisticated songs, but was not literate. So the question of plagiarizing, stealing from his lyrics did not arise, for him at least. He didn't write it. This was only last year's story. You must have known that. This is Muhammad Rafi. So anyway, so that's the way it goes. But I am suggesting that this kind of cultures exist, this kind of communities exist, this kind of traditions exist, not only in the non-literate cultures, which the anthropologists study with great relish, but also within our kinds of culture. Some areas are not covered by literacy and cannot be covered by literacy. I also do this because, and here I begin with what I have written, that the primary job of collective memories, my main emphasis here is collective memories, in our times is not to supply an additional archive for historians, ensure social cohesion, or define national culture. For pursuing these lofty ideas, there are enough institutions and usually also an appreciative middle class to applaud in most countries. The shared memories which I talk about are the ones that protect vulnerable communities and cultures. A private, autonomous, inviolate space, relatively inviolate space, that cannot be easily violated, outside the domain of the state and outside authoritative, professional, historical constructions of the past. This space is less encumbered by ideological demands, political correctness, and reliable official empirical basis. That does not mean that this space is the domain of privileged truth. But it is the domain where privileged truths are contested, sometimes seriously, because we always have private spaces where we have doubts about some of the macro decisions which shape our lives. At the moment, after all the treaties, agreements, and checks on nuclear weaponry, we still have the capacity to kill every human being on the earth at least 15 times. Now, United States itself has the capacity now to kill everybody in the world 6 times. That's the claim. Now the question arises, why do you need 6 times the capacity? Once is good enough. You want to kill everybody itself. Once is good enough. But you have. So we all, in the heart of us, have our own suspicions. I am only articulating. This also is likely to be controversial. These memories can be screen memories. It is a psychoanalytic term which simply means that these memories may not be always correct. Because memories get distorted, memories get reshaped, memories get forgotten, memories get edited, and so on and so forth. But then, these memories are expected to serve as checks on other memories, which are also screen memories. And these checks and counter-checks of screen memories gives a multipolar world of memories within which we live. Such collective memories are a ledger on which a community or a culture writes its passions, respectable or seeming, fair or unfair, secret or open, for outsiders willing to read, cope with, and guard against. I have argued elsewhere that this is one of the pillars of the other cosmopolitanism with which some societies and communities in Asia and Africa have continued to live, and even parts of Europe might have at one time lived. I have tentatively called it Silk Route cosmopolitanism. It is a cosmopolitanism that can live with more radical diversity and host the otherness of others. Hosting the otherness of others, or not hosting the sameness of others. I do not like Johnson Chang because he conforms to my concept of what is good in a culture, what is bad, or what is the right way to live. I learn to cherish the very fact that he thinks other things are in, and not the ones I do. So I cherish the diversity itself, the otherness of others, rather than the sameness of others. In the dominant model of cosmopolitanism, it is assumed, because the dominant model is scaffolded by the values of the European Enlightenment of the 17th century, it teaches us to value the sameness, the values that Enlightenment itself upheld. Whereas I am talking about the kind of cosmopolitanism where you live with other cultures and other ideas, which are not only inconsistent with your ideas, but they directly challenge. I will give, if I have time permits, I will give some examples of that. The autonomous space occupied by this often disowned, contraband or lost memory can be dredged for clues to diverse imaginations of a desirable society. And resistances, no, just a minute. Playing with multiple visions of the future and generating independent audits and resistances to the grand projects of ambitious missionary nation states and the corporate world in our time. If the paths of our plural futures run through our constructed past, as Bruno Latour seems to suppose, the defiance of official or sanctioned past is a vital part of that plurality. When institutionalized as a cultural form, these memories become what D. Venkatrao in a recent book, which has just come out, D. Venkatrao calls mnemocultural configurations, memory-based configurations, leading in turn to mnemocultural praxis, which survive even in the interstices and margins of many officially recognized literate text-based cultures as disowned stepchildren or poor cousins, and a standing embarrassment to a modern state, developed or developing, and the cultures of knowledge endorsed by the Enlightenment. Unlike Venkatrao, however, I do not believe that a textual can successfully exile the memory-based, or the power relationship between the memory-based and the text-based is fixed. For more we try to marginalize memory-based knowledge or awareness or information, the deeper we push it down in our awareness. It is not given to us to self-consciously or purposely forget. It is part of our human nature, human personality. It is a psychological self. You cannot deliberately forget anything. That's not given to human beings. You cannot try. It's like counting one's breathing. breath. If you count your breath goes wrong. Normal breathing involves not counting. If you try to count, then you will find that you are stuck. Your breathing doesn't come normal anymore. There's so many things like that. I can go on giving examples. I mean, human beings cannot, this Freud said that, human beings cannot imagine themselves dead. That is one fantasy of immortality. The source of the fantasy of immortality is this: human beings cannot imagine themselves dead. You try to imagine yourself dead, you are dead and lying there dead, but you were seeing it as a third person. You are seeing that yourself, that you are lying there. So it is not given to us to imagine ourselves as dead. This is not biologically. So there are this kind of things. So this is one of them. You cannot deliberately forget. Forgetting happens. It cannot be therefore engineered. That is the basic argument here. That forgetting cannot be innate. And therefore people have memories. And because you cannot forget it, memories return and haunt you at uncomfortable moments. That survival of memories and return challenge our certitudes and self-definition and seek to redefine our collective self. We remain fearful and anxious when facing the threat because it challenges even our fondest beliefs. We all know that our revealed sacred texts often come in memory. And the culture of everyday life and our most intimate moments are memory intensive. We know the power of the memory. At this level, memories are where our experience, imagination, and values meet our fears, anxieties, and secret selves. In this one arena, the scales are not weighted in favor of the official, the authoritative, and the respectable. Seen thus, the main responsibility of memory is to be memory, and not for us to admit, for us to admit, in the well-known words of the Kashmiri poet Agha Sayyid Ali, your history gets in the way of my memory. This is the poet. Your history gets in the way of my memory. I am everything you lost. You cannot forgive me. I am everything you lost. Your perfect enemy. Source of controversy is there because there is the awareness that those who are taking up the cause of collective memories as an alternative to history are posing a threat to our settled world. Collective memories, unfettered but tempered by individual ethics and whimsies and by the demands of everyday life, are a robust presence that refuses to fade away or be disciplined. They can be an alternative history of emotions, building blocks of visions, and can even be a form of social criticism, as for instance, when the past is deployed to critique contemporary politics, culturally or ethically. Memories can sometimes play the same role in a community that dreams play in a person. For memory work, like Sigmund Freud's idea of dream work, is an under-socialized, multi-layered affair. It too has its manifest and latent contents. It too mobilizes processes such as condensation, displacement, visualization, and secondary exhibition, or and forget that, that's meant for the scholars. Each of these processes refracts and bends reality. But we are here talking of communities, not individuals. over time, these distortions and overstretched readings become collective hermeneutic acts. Like dreams. As dreams tell you something, you learn how to interpret dreams. Similarly, memories distorted memories tell you something if you have learned or trained yourself to read in between lines. The world of hermeneutics is not egalitarian, and some cultural and intellectual traditions enjoy hermeneutic privileges that humbler traditions do not. That also is part of the story. It is only in the case of the southern hemisphere of the world that we have to, there are limits to hermeneutics. Otherwise it is limitless. So when Friedrich Engels says and Marx agrees that the conquest of Algeria by France was a great story and a good news, especially this word, good news, because now Algeria will be brought within civilization. But this will be seen as a minor aberration in otherwise glorious career. It will be explained away as a unfortunate reading of 19th century anthropological literature. That privilege is not given to African or Asian scholars. So we have to work with a different set of limits. I can produce this kind of quotes from a whole plethora of great thinkers, from Hegel and Immanuel Kant, all the way down to Jefferson and his democratic theory, so on and so forth. I don't want to go into that. Darwin and Karl Marx, all the way. But nobody notices this. They are not supposed to be noticed in the case of the great thinkers of the West. But in case of our thinkers, you have to explain why he didn't do this or why he said that. One false note invalidates them once for all. Okay, anyway, that's not the important part. Memory work corrects for that inequity, because it gives you the scope to privately retain another position, to know what is what. Memory work helps maintain a separate, private or secret ledger on which communities can write their sufferings that have not found voice in the public sphere and lowbrow subjectivities that embarrass their conventional cosmopolitan selves. These mnemonic records are framed by defined categories and associated with modes of analysis to which the dominant protocols of knowledge and reasoning have no access. I claim for memory work the same rights that Freud's idea of dream work enjoys. Memory work can lead us to the sources of a community's psychological health and provide clues to its creativity, but it can also sometimes underwrite shared violent fantasies and exaggerated sense of past injuries waiting to be avenged. But then, memory work can also provide communities towards cultivated, calibrated forgetfulness that comes not from failures of memory, but from what can be called principled forgetfulness. You sometimes choose to live life with anti-memories, as if you have forgotten the unforgettable, as if you have worked through your haunting experiences of genocide, uprooting, torture, and blood feuds. These are not only words I picked up randomly. These have come from my direct empirical experience while working on genocide. I have worked on this genocide that took place years ago in India. and also work with comparative genocide for 15 years now. And I'm astonished in the way in which ordinary people, ordinary victims, people who have sometimes lost as many as 3/4 of their own families, what they have to say about the past. It is very, very moving. I will probably, if I have time, I will come back to that also. In a study of mass violence that attended the birth of India and Pakistan in 1947, some survivors did not want to remember the times they remembered every day. This seems to be a contradiction. Some survivors did not want to remember the times they remembered every day. They believed that there were times when people had lost their humanity altogether, and like snakes and gods, the times would return if you remember them. This is what one woman said. Others believed that at that time they had gone mad, and so had we. This is by a woman who had lost her whole family. And by the Sikhs who were butchered. So every night she used to wake up in her sleep and scream in her nightmares. The Sikhs are coming, the Sikhs are coming. They will butcher us all. And our granddaughter asked, she's a human rights activist. At that time she told me this. Just before she was dying, you must be very angry with the Sikhs, isn't it? And the mother grandmother said, no. At that time they have gone mad. So indeed, I am tempted to go further. Stephen Toulmin mentions towards the beginning of Cosmopolis. I think this is I see. In any case, you have the script, so pick it up. All I am trying to say is this, that I hope the study of memory work will not merely lead to build us grand archives and museums of memories, as people are building, but also teach us to grant some dignity to communities that live by memory-dependent knowledge, art forms, and life support systems, and also force us to reassess intellectual projects that systematically ignore the entire range of apparently modest, disposable memory banks of the marginalized and the forgotten. Here too, an entire continent of human experience is waiting to be explored, and at least few dates to be prepared. The Third Reich, Nazi Germany, offered an easy way of handling the situation, which I shall ignore for the moment, but I shall mention it nonetheless. More than a decade ago, in one of the Holocaust museums of the United States, I accidentally discovered at one corner a few charming small examples of craftsmanship. If I ornate combs, small mirrors, some charming lacework, handmade kitchenware, and so on, all of which looked out of place in those green surroundings. Then I noticed the inscription that said that the artifacts were actually collected by the Nazis themselves for a future museum of an extreme grace. They wanted to establish the museum. Once the final solution of the Jewish problem had been enforced. So this is very, very grim and very nasty because Nazi Germany did it. But you will find even in our very civilized governments and regimes that this is not something unknown. I mean, many of our governments and regimes, our rulers, would be delighted if some of the indigenous people and groups quit the stage. Then they can build a lovely museum in their honor at the center of the city. to which tourists will flock as a great cultural achievement. So on so forth. Museum as well. And this is a normal story. Mexican culture lives much better in the museum at Mexico City than outside. But that's the way. Museumization is a very natural way of handling the situation. Everybody would like them to do that. From our own countries, we can give examples of that kind. What's up are cultural memories that seem to represent the resistance to the mega project of modern nation states? Ideologies of progress, development, national security, and monolithic ideas of national identity. They include memories that defy history and its disciplinary conventions. I do not reject the idea of oral history, but I reject its pretensions to being the final destination of refurbished or restored memories that have not been captured in text and audiovisual records. I believe that the totality of the experience of sustaining and transmitting memories over generations in all its emotional richness and filigree details is better captured in the humble algorithm of everyday life in cultures and communities that have learned to live in peace with the mnemonic. That is the way life has gone on, and cultural continuity ensured in the backyards of the world. Neither that mnemocultural praxis nor its distinctive way of reproducing itself owes any obligation to history or to the institution of museums. After the major ideologies that have ensured the death of a significant proportion of humankind, after the decline in the fate of these killer ideologies, now development has chosen to wear the garb of a new faith, to call for fresh blood sacrifices. And indeed, millions of lives and thousands of lives have already been sacrificed for it, without as much as an apology. In India, the estimated number of people displaced due to development is roughly 60 million, and that figure is nearly 10 years old. 60 million. This is 3 times the figure of total people, number of people displaced during the partition of India in its first 20 years. We cannot even mourn such losses. We are told it is a form, because we are told that it is a form of romantic nostalgia, no better than a deadly epidemic. Memories are under attack in many ways. Accordingly, acceptable visions of a desirable society can now be located only in the future, though at one time they could be located both in the past and the future. In the Garden of Eden, the concept of the past, which also is in the future. We can no longer enter the future through the past, whatever Lacan might say. That ecstatic play with the past strand. And this I will also mention. Let me give a little concrete examples so that people do not choose. Memory work does not have to accept culture as consumable or reducible to cuisine, plastic arts, events on proscenium stage, music, tourist sites, ethnographic accounts, and museums. There is a standardized ways in managing and taming cultures. Memory work fits memories into the non-heroic rhythm of everyday life so that they are not erased. Michio Araki, a Japanese scholar of popular religion, used to claim that the Japanese past has been so efficiently historicized and given a teleological thrust that there was a now near total consensus that Japan's past was inexorably moving towards a developed modern Japan. Only in Japan's popular religion was there the shadow of a more open-ended past. That open-ended past, Araki believed, had become an inaccessible contraband past, but it was not entirely lost. Collective memories are being engineered and dismantled around all of us. Anyway, let us not forget what memories are being destroyed not only by the dedicated external enemies, by imperious power-drunk despots, or arrogant social engineers eager to wipe clean the imperfect landscapes of mind, but also by well-meaning nation-state and liberal democratic dispensations. Entire sections of people in many parts of the world are being redefined as obsolete or redundant. The three great peasantries of the world, the Russian, the Chinese, and the Indian, which looked fiercely independent, resilient, and immovable only a century ago, are now supine, pliant, and permanently dependent on experts, policymakers, global market, and multinational corporations. Their back broken, their self-confidence wiped out. Do the hundreds of little cultures they have spawned and nurtured over the centuries have any future? I doubt it. In India, till 2009, that is 5-year-old data, about 250,000 farmers have committed suicide in the previous 2 decades. The data released by the Indian National Crime Bureau shows that a huge majority of the suicides take place not in the poverty-stricken parts of India, but where growth rates have been high and agriculture has been modernized and exposed more to globalization. So the peasants are committing suicide in response to the fact that they have lost agency and control over their lives, that they are entirely dependent on the bureaucracy, on politicians, scientists, and laboratories, and the various kind of products they make, and they might walk by. Can memories be made to sing again? I come to that. Can memories be made to sing again? Not officially sponsored or subsidized memories, mobilized for routine politics and statecraft, but the humbler ones, reflecting the creativity of everyday life and the possibilities opened up by arts, music, crafts, and partly mnemonic traditions of healing and agronomy, independent, irreverent, and defiant. Let me give an example. I regain hope when I see the trajectory of the two main schools of Indian classical music during the last 65 years. During the period, persistent attempts have been made to formalize these traditions and make them more teachable in modern institutions. Nearly 60 universities now give degrees in music. You can now get a doctorate in Indian music from a whole range of respectable universities and become a proper musicologist and music critic. But till now, in the last 65 years, none of these universities has produced a single great performing artist or composer. A few who seem to defy this summary judgment maintain double ledgers. They proudly source their musicology to their university education, their music to personal gurus and mnemonic training. That means training is entirely mnemonic. Many a times the teacher is illiterate. The last 6 decades have seen a remarkable expansion of the reach of Indian classical music, both within and outside the borders of India. We have left behind the times when Arturo Toscanini, the famous Italian conductor, could publicly proclaim with contempt that Indian music was no music at all, for the Indian musicians did not know where to begin and where to stop. Even Max Muller, who spent his whole life studying India, could openly say to an Indian friend, Rabindranath Tagore, Tagore's grandfather, that he found in Indian music no melody, no harmony, and no rhythm. Indian music has survived and has remained as memory dependent as it always has been. The great singers, instrumentalists, composers, and teachers have all acted like living libraries and walking universities. They have mnemonically passed their knowledge to their students and experimented with new ragas, musical forms, and even technology of musical instruments. Even that without any text written or otherwise. Many of their students are well educated, but when learning from their gurus, they learn to give primacy to the mnemonic. The oral culture that has grown around this knowledge system has been both cumulative and inclusive. Indian classical music has proved its resilience and self-confidence. Other memory-intensive cultural products have not been so fortunate. Obscure healing systems of many tribes and castes, craft traditions and schools of art of small communities, even crop diversity and eco-sensitive viable agronomies that fail to compete with multinational corporations in the short run, they all face extinction today as libraries of human creativity, self-expression, and intellectual adventure. The musical traditions and art forms that show signs of life are exceptions, not the rule. Let me end with an example that makes the same point at a more humble scale and can be read as an unintended ballad on inglorious obscurity, uncertain future, and unsung death. Anthropologist Stephen Thomas, in his book, The Last Navigator, speaks of a culture not backed by a billion people, but by a small group of surviving traditional navigators in Sataba, a remote island in South Pacific. He apprenticed himself to one of them some 30 years ago as part of his field work. Thomas learned how this ancient mariner, Mau Piailu, sensitively read the currents of water, waves, winds, and clouds. The moving landscape of the islands, the changing colors of the ocean, the sky, and the positions of the sun, the moon, and other stars and planets, flights of birds, movements of shoals of fish, floating flora, and myriad such variables. These were the skills that had allowed Piailu's ancestors to cross the formidable, irascible Pacific Ocean to settle down in the various islands 6,000 years ago and to move from island to island over the centuries. I am sure modern navigation technology has made the aging master terribly obsolete. But what about the hugely sensitive mix of a massive range of empirical observations and cognitive skills, the ones that are entered into an enormous, informal, invisible, multivariate matrix in one's mind for an intuitive factor analysis by a trained navigator negotiating an unruly ocean? What kind of memory work does it involve? Does Piailu's memory have something to tell us about the range and possibilities of human cognitive skill? Does it challenge our criteria of deciding which memory should be protected from posterity and which can be safely allowed to die? Do we really have the right to an eugenics of memories and claim, in the manner of the Third Reich, the right to destroy memories unworthy of memories? All this is not an attempt to undervalue projects concerned with the protection and recovery of cultural heritage intertwined with textuality. Those who have seen the documentaries and photographs of devastation to which cities such as Dresden, Warsaw, Tokyo, Nanking, Hiroshima and Baghdad have stood witness can guess the enormity of cultural loss many societies have to live with. These traumatizing losses do require an emphasis on cultural resources, libraries, archives and manuscripts, sculptures, murals and paintings, architectural works and artisan craft. All that can be retrieved, reconstructed, catalogued, restored and saved from oblivion. They are repositories of a way of life, intellectual tradition and distinct styles of human creativity. Humanity itself is diminished by that loss. I am humbled by the efforts that have been made to protect what has fortunately survived organized vandalism and deliberate ethnocide. However, I do believe that victim of societies, if not perhaps of nation states, imposes responsibilities on the victims once they have emerged empowered and triumphant from their ordeal. A society truly rises above its suffering only when it tries to be not merely a symbol of its own suffering, but also that of all others who have undergone similar suffering. I am willing to invert the proposition to make it stronger. No community can claim a unique chosen status unless it self-consciously abjures its chosen status and is willing to stand witness to the suffering of all other communities that have suffered from the same kind of violence. I don't know. Attempts to see the suffering of a people as a marker of a chosen status or as a sign of the rest of the world ganging up against them is to trivialize the experience of suffering. The Israeli state, many believe, is a prime instance of this. I hope that the effort to protect memories will not force us to meekly accept the obsolescence of Mau Piailu, the Patchitrakas of Bengal, the tattered cultures of the gypsies in Europe, the non-culture of the non-people called Palestinians, Arabs, and others like them, who emerge from the sundry little cultures of the world and work on unknown corners of human knowledge, imagination, and memory. They also are part of everyone's cultural heritage. How to understand, revalue, and protect living memory banks? There is no easy answer to it. However, one must at least be bold enough to affirm that some skills and some vocations are more heavily memory dependent and require long face-to-face intense interactions between the recognized carriers of knowledge and their chosen apprentices or students. Written texts, scores and digitalized records do not do full justice to them, and to appreciate their hidden grandeur, one must look at them in their own terms. When one does so, it does not diminish the importance of cultural artifacts and past one is trying to save from oblivion, but gives depth to the enterprise and enhances its ethical significance. Paying homage to human creativity preserved in alien forms of memory work is granting dignity to our own unexplored selves and our non-actualized potentialities. Thank you very much for your question. I will start with a confession. I don't want to beat about the bush. I don't think I made a good presentation because the paper was circulated in 2 languages. We have all read it or have seen it. I didn't have to read it. I could have had my say, whatever. So that I will do now. Look, we are living at a time when the world is more or less known, at least geographically, and many people think in other ways too. Because the kinds of knowledge we have, from disciplines ranging all the way from biology to history and geography, has given us a sense of omniscience. We are almost godlike, we think we are in knowledge. This awareness, for good or for worse, have generated a culture of knowledge and a culture of learning where information processing has become more important than information creation. Management is very important. That's what our laptops are supposed to do. You are managing information, managing inputs. So there is this part of the story. And in this new culture of knowledge, the universities equip you for a professional life very well, but equip you less to question the world of knowledge itself, particularly its fundamental issues. You can ask questions. After a professor has made a presentation, you can ask questions. You can contest many of the things said. But the fundamentals of knowledge are not questioned. It is in that process that we have now black holes of knowledge in virtually every discipline. There is also other kinds of black holes where certain kinds of individuals, certain kinds of collectivities disappear through it. And nobody is bothered because this is seen as normal and natural. Now, Hilbert made a lovely presentation about the 1965 genocide in Indonesia. But 1965 genocide in Indonesia should have been known and studied and explored at least 50 years ago. At least 50 years ago. Even Indonesia had the privilege of then having as an ethnographer Clifford Geertz and his distinguished ethnographer wife. They were in situ, right there in Indonesia, because he was a man who had always talked about thick description. He is known for, that's the concept of his best known in anthropology, thick description. That means the description should be so thick and detailed that by itself that ethnography should stand by itself. And yet, if you read the work, you will not find any mention of Indonesian genocide. One or two sentences talk about some problems, as if we are talking of a minor epidemic of influenza. Nothing more than that. Which black hole of history did the Indonesian genocide fall through and disappear from our consciousness? We are forced to recognize that ultimately there is a hierarchy of genocides also. Exactly as there are a hierarchy of countries and cultures, there is a hierarchy of genocides too. Some genocides should make you, empower you if you study them, and some genocides better not be touched. Better not be touched because they had the complicity. They can boast of the complicity of very renowned, very powerful forces and persons. The 1975 Bangladesh genocide also has fallen through the black hole of history. Nobody wants to talk about it. Certainly not Mr. Kissinger, who is the only surviving big lord who was complicit with it, Mr. Nixon for that matter, President Nixon. Because it was. Bangladesh said 3 million died, even if you accept the smaller number, 1.76 million, which others are more serious about the issue have suggested. 1.76 million is not a small number. Nobody was there. Goes to spend. So there is this part of the story. And part of this story, development, part of this situation has come around from the fact that there are larger, they're said to be, larger impersonal forces in society, history and economy which rule our lives, which we shouldn't, without knowing too much about them, meddle with and leave them to the experts, to the more knowledgeable and the more politically powerful. This is the situation. This is one part of the story. The second part of the story is this, and this is harsh reality, that the social sciences, the culture of knowledge with the social sciences represent the entire edifice of knowledge matter is a product of the Enlightenment. Everybody knows that. European Enlightenment of the 17th century. But that they are also simultaneously a product of four major events in global history for which shape these social sciences. One, the discovery of America and the 200-year history of systematic genocide of the indigenous people in America, the world's most successful genocide, if you want to go by available records. According to some, more than 95% of the indigenous people were killed by intention or by neglect, because they also brought European diseases there. And they knew about it. In some cases they even used that. For example, they have distributed smallpox infected blankets as a gift to some of the American Indian tribes. Some say contest that's a highly exaggerated view. Only 92% died, not 95%. Well, somebody has said no, 82%. That kind of thing. Now, let us not go into nitty-gritty, but that was very systematic extermination of people. And if you read the European writings of the time, you see what to justify that spread of new civilization, a new kinds of criteria were introduced in the evolution of societies. No longer were societies, cultures, civilizations considered different and spread on a horizontal plane. They were seen as located on an evolutionary plane, a la Charles Darwin. So it was not difference. What was different on a horizontal plane was converted into a vertical plane. So the difference didn't remain there, it went down. So you are not different from me. You and we are brothers. All human beings are. And I was like you 200 years ago. I have improved and become this. And if you want to improve and be civilized, then you become like me. Over the next 200 years, read my textbooks, read the histories I produced and sociology and social evolution and theory that became the new thing. In fact, you will find that when Voltaire said China was the most civilized country in the world, right sitting in center of Western Hemisphere, and within less than 100, I would say within 50 years, it already began. China was a kind of China and India were rich cultures and civilization at one time, but now they are senile and old and decadent. Whole imagery has changed. Okay, anyway. The second traumatic, the second big event, great achievement of Europe after the American genocide was the new form of colonialism which came. Colonialism was already there. Even in the first phase of discovery of America, the Spaniards and Portuguese also were colonial power. But the colonial power, they were basically after gold and assets. New form of colonialism, because enlightenment values have meanwhile shifted. So, you need a different kind of justification of colonialism, and the idea of colonialism as a civilizing mission entered the scene. It is a new kind of colonialism. And the British, the French and the German hegemonized this particular form. All three traced their origins, cultural origins, new culture with which they lived, to ancient Greece, Athenian democracy. Though Athenian democrats had never heard of these countries, they were more in touch with Egypt, Persia, India, and God forsaken Afghanistan. They had not heard of it. They had nothing to do with it. But they became their ancestors, and we were supposed to then live with an ancestral envy. There's another Freudian concept from which I have drawn, I guess. So, we have suffered from emphasis, they have this part. Simultaneously, there was the Atlantic slave trade, which I consider to be the first attempt to globalize the world. First, because it was a four-continent trade. It was not a backyard business. It was a four-continent trade which took the toll of at least 6 million African lives. Some say it is an understatement because 1/3 of the people died during the passage, crossing of Atlantic Ocean, because they were packed like sardines in the ship, not like human beings. So the toll must have been much more. Plus, the exposure to the new diseases and things like that, the toll must have been more than 10 million. But let us not go into that. This number game also is a very dangerous game. So the African slave trade was such an intrinsic part of the system that even the world's first democratic constitution, when it was penned by Jefferson, and Jefferson became immortal because of that, he still had slaves at his home, handful of slaves. But it didn't bother him, because the real question was, according to many of them, whether the slaves had, whether they had soul or not. That the Christian church was debating that. So this was the problem. And finally, the two world wars. Two world wars. Now, you will find that in 19th century, when most of the social sciences developed, one of the main themes since then had been what determines knowledge. What determines knowledge? What kind of social, political, and economic forces define the matrix within which knowledge is generated? And everybody was trying to find out the sources of knowledge. But the search for sources of knowledge in Europe never reflected back to ask what kind of knowledge these four events I have mentioned had on knowledge itself. There is no study you will find which systematically explores this part of the story. That what the knowledge you have produced, what you did to that knowledge and what kind of brutalization is reflected in that knowledge. That was really your life. Nobody asked that question. I am still waiting for an answer. And one of the reasons you find that from Hegel to Kant and David Hume to Marx, irrespective of which side of the political ideological spectrum you come from, they have all have strong racist components. Extremely strong racist components. And I propose to you that the problem I picked up today is a part of that story. He had no concept of these societies. Most of them never visited it. But if you read Marx, you find that with what confidence he is speaking of India and its future. That colonialism has liberated India from savagery. Where did he get that idea? You just see. Same thing with Kant, who is supposed to be one of the fathers of contemporary knowledge. I want to turn the focus back on that. But that's a larger project. I cannot finish. You people might finish it. I don't have long enough life. But I want to leave this on the table. I don't want to hide it. I want to leave it on the table. See, that has to be somehow confronted. What happened? How it went into the interstices of knowledge system. It is not, if I may indirectly answer to one part of the question, to enrich history or make it more inclusive, that I pose the idea of memory. I'm opposing the idea of history because history freezes the past. History thinks that it is searching for truth. It freezes the past. That is why in desperation somebody like Gandhi says that I'm not interested in history, I'm only interested in getting things done. So he dismisses all this historical determinism of all kinds. But not only that, I think the other problem with history is this: history doesn't have to, history doesn't want to deal with live, living, thriving, acting human beings. Human beings who have feelings and emotions. History's priority is in archives. History's priority is in historical records, and the records are located in archives. You can imagine what kind of support you can hope to get if you do not the kind of culture which has produced archives. What are the kind? What kind of justice you will get from history? I think it is absurd. Whether it's the indigenous people in China or India, because our rulers also pick up this same history, same style of doing history, as a kind of great progressive move. So the idea is this paper was how to put ethics into knowledge, however unfashionable it might sound. How to put a touch of ethics in knowledge. And that is why I gave the example of PILO. Now, I didn't tell you that because that's a wrong way of justifying it. And now, PILO's description of how to negotiate the island through navigation also includes the fact that they see the islands as moving like a boat now and never moving in their calculation. The boats they're driving that matter. They don't move. They calculate on the basis of, they presume the islands are moving. The sun and moon are moving, but not the boat. Very strange. Now, if a number of famous scientists have argued that that's the better way, that's the clue to the success of that exercise. One of them is a Nobel Prize nominee, and they're scientists. One of them is trying to say that this is the right way to look at it. But by now P.I. is dead, and probably the whole tribe of navigators is also dead. They are now proletarianized, selling perhaps tea and biscuits in the local tea shops to the tourists. So that's life. That's life. I do believe many of these points they have said are very important issues have come up, and I don't want to trivialize them by casually dealing with them. But I want to say that there are such, I will give you one example from my own experience. About 15 years ago, I suddenly confronted the fact that no European has written, except two anthropologists, I think there are exceptions, but not the way I am putting it. No, written, about Indian or Chinese or Japanese, Asian and African religions, without ever mentioning the fact that from Japan to west of Africa, the whole landmass, there is no old word for religion. There is no word for religion. I have tried to find out to the best of my knowledge what is the word for religion, and then ask how old it is. Invariably the word has come in 19th century as a translation of religion. What it means also is very interesting. For instance, the borders of religion which never existed have come into being with the inclusion of these new words of religion. In Japan, 95% of the people are Shintos, 85% are Buddhists. So it's very difficult to have a really Shinto Buddhist world. In China, if you add up the number of Taoists, percentage of Taoists, and the percentage of Confucians, and the percentage of Buddhists, I think the figure will probably cost 200%. Now, what kind of religion is this? What kind of faith you are talking about? When you cannot mark out the borders that way, when you don't have to say that I am a Confucian, therefore I cannot be Taoist, and I'm a Taoist, therefore I cannot be Buddhist. When does it come? How does it come? You have to ask that question. Only 3 weeks ago in North, while presenting a paper on this West African Cameroon, I think Cameroon, the person said that somebody asked about the composition of religion, and he said we are 80% Muslims, 20% Christians, and 100% animists. So, that's the way religion goes. India, because it has a colonial tradition, we have calculated in the neat percentages we will get. 82% Hindu, 14% Muslim, and 2.5% Christian, 1.5% Sikhs. Isn't that the full story? In 1992-93, for the first time, the Anthropological Survey of India did a survey of communities, not individuals, like the census does. And they found that nearly 15% of the 4,000 communities they studied where could be classified under more than one religion. Communities. That doesn't mean that a community has people belonging to Hindus and Muslims. It means that each person there can be classified either as a Hindu or as a Muslim or both. And I believe that that tradition is been pushed underground. Even the kind of Islamic fundamentalism which rejects other creeds and other formations of Islam, I'm convinced that part of it has come from the idea of very clear margins among religions. Because fundamentalism was Islam, there was. Wahhabis and Salafis were there for centuries. But that does not mean they looked at this process in this fashion, with clear-cut borders. That is the way it has gone. So, in that kind of a context, we are looking at social knowledge. In that kind of a context, we are looking for what are the interstices, what are the openings or gaps, what are the escape routes in Gideon. And this paper, I want to explore a little bit of that part of the story, successfully and unsuccessfully. I might have failed mostly, but that doesn't disappoint me. I will start again, if necessary. But this search I cannot give up because this is vital. This is vital. That is why I give the example of Indian music, where on the that it is possible to survive even in the contemporary world with a different concept of the mnemonic. It is not a lost battle. It is still possible to produce walking encyclopedias of music. Only recently, when one of the well-known musicians died, there was a obituary by a well-known critic. He said it was a walking encyclopedia of music. This was Savannah on Vincent Joseph. Now this you can still say. You can still say this is possible. I have met similar persons in other areas of life. This carry on knowledge with it, and this knowledge is less contaminated, whatever you might say, with this culture of knowledge we have talked about. That's my real defense, why I am doing this exercise. I am very grateful to all the participants, particularly these three young persons who have made excellent presentations. If I had time, I would have gone a little more detail, but I have taken notes, and when I write again this paper, some of this will be reflected there. I am very grateful for that. But this is my enterprise, so I am not trying to justify it by history. I don't believe that something called nationality exists in this part of the world. Nationality exists only in those parts of the world where people have been atomized. We are not atomized people. They are communities. They are communities and multiple rings of communities. Traditionally, the peasants were a community, but peasant armies also were there. The kings also mobilized people for defense of the country. And many of the things, we have just picked up the slogans. I was astonished. I will just give one instance to finish my thing. I was astonished when I saw the royal palace of the Maharaja of Cochin, because I was doing a study there. No respectable Chinese or Indian plutocrat, or what you like to call them, business tycoons, would spend one night there. It was so modest. It looked like the house of a village landlord, and yet we talk of feudalism. I am more impressed by the fact that he was the king who, when the Jews ran away from Goa because of the oppression of this, the European anti-Semitism in Goa also came. So they ran away to Cochin. The king, not, as I said, was very surprised to hear that a synagogue could be destroyed by the Christians. Because he said, this was a place of worship, why should they destroy it? Then he said, all right, you rebuild your synagogue here. And if you build it next to the royal palace and the royal temple so that nobody will touch it. The synagogue still shares one wall with the royal palace and one wall with the royal temple, the Hindu temple. It's still there. And he gave a plaque to the Jews, copper plaque, which they still show with great pride, that till the sun and moon are in their orbits, these people will enjoy full citizenship of the state. So even our concept of feudalism is more, even though it talks only of this part of the world. No, it is not really genuine. It's shocked through with this kind of thing. I was myself surprised. I mean, there was this letter a friend of mine showed. I have not seen that correspondence with one of the viceroys of India and the secretary of the India House in England. The viceroy complains that the Maharaja of Chittor in Rajasthan is a highly respected Maharaja. And he complained that this person doesn't know how to live with dignity. He draws an allowance of 3,000 rupees from his own treasury. And half the money he spends on his lunch, because his lunches are open, so even the peasants come and have lunch every day. Sometimes 300, 400 people come and have lunch. So half his allowance goes in that. So he says, I hereby recommend that the Maharaja's allowance hereby is to increase it to not 3,000 rupees a month, but 3,000 rupees a day. That is more kingly. And that is dutifully done. Within 1.5 generations, the lunch thing was over, and the Maharaja's family was showing all the typical signs of feudal decadence, so that we could write our pieces on feudalism and prove it to the hilt with the example of the Maharana of Chittor. So this is the way things go. Let me not hold you long because there is a discussion happening. I only would like to point out that the aim is not to complete history. The aim is to de-sanctify history. De-sanctify history. The aim is not to complement and enrich and have our modernity. The aim is to de-sanctify modernity. I think the time has come for that. Time has come for us to affirm that we have our way, our right to our judgment on you. Exactly, we have at the and we have at least, even if we are modest, at least we have a right to our judgment of us. Please grant us that. Thank you very much.